So the next thing we're going to discuss here is, the metaphor of a snake. And the reason why we're going to talk about this, because in a lot of these videos about this kind of Marian way of redeeming ideas, this way of finding immaculate concepts through the Immaculate Conception that we're discussing in all of these videos, we talk a lot about the serpent. We talk a lot about this metaphor of the snake, of the serpent. And this metaphor is something that's very useful to describing lots of aspects of our interior life. And in this video, I'm going to use the metaphor of the snake to try to describe the phases of my life, especially in relationship to how we are using the serpent, so to speak, in these different phases. And as a result of like how I came to this understanding of, how like, I guess, this came together for me. Because I think this concept is useful to myself, to the church, to understanding my way of how to be in the world. And so we can go like, basically like life, when I was a kid, was kind of, just normal, kind of a snake maybe going through its daily life, it could be twisty, it could be straight, it could be all different things. But the thing is that eventually as an adolescent, we could see the beginnings of different anxieties, different fears, different things like that. And these type of things really became very intense for me. I had very intense types of obsessiveness and anxiety. And there's this, when I was, especially when I was younger, and, not that I'm wonderful at that now, but there's this sense in which this represents, this kind of coiling in on myself. And, this kind of dissatisfaction that's going around in a circle. And, this is very, helpful, you don't understand, because it's like when we kind of coil in on ourselves, it's like that thinking, when we go, someone's crazy, we go like this. It's like that snake coiling in on itself, kind of losing touch with reality, just going in around its own coils, around its own paths, obsessing about different things, having problems. And that's really how I was as an adolescent. And then I discovered, I was reading this book, Lord of the Rings and Philosophy. And this enabled me to, really begin to see the, to really see the way in which, I could bring my mind at the present moment. And that made me feel a bit better. But the problem is that I didn't interpret this in light of a theistic or a Catholic understanding. I interpreted this in light of a very Eastern meditation type of an understanding. And this made me go off into the Eastern religions, where if we want to use this metaphor of the snake, you could see something really helpful. You could think about the Ouroboros, which is this serpent swallowing its own tail. And that's what essentially happens when you practice Eastern meditation. And that's what I was doing. So I was practicing this idea of, of this thing of, paying attention to my own awareness, being inside myself. And eventually I became content with the experience of my own created nature, meaning I was just like that serpent eating its own tail. I became content being able to observe myself, listen to myself, and be calm with myself rather than talking to God. I became content with the operations of my creaturely nature. I became, what we might say, lost in the beauty of the created light of my soul, rather than being interested in the uncreated light and love of God. And so I was like that snake eating its own tail, content with swallowing itself and feeling that it was full, where obviously that is not a very satisfying meal. But it was enough, to get me to, it was deeply interesting. It felt like I had found the answer to all my problems. Eventually, because I'm swallowing myself, I had a terrible experience. I had this terrible experience in meditation where I almost, choked, essentially. And so had to let go of having this attitude of really chewing on myself in meditation. And I lost all my ability to use my coping skills. And I really felt deeply uncomfortable, deeply unsatisfied. It took a long time because now I had to find my way back to the church because I was practicing all these Eastern meditations. All of my coping skills were based on this. And I needed to find a new way to live. My mind was completely fried because I had kind of had this failed enlightenment experience because I almost managed to swallow myself, so to speak, so that I couldn't come out of that position, so that my mind would have been in some way, probably at a there's probably different ways of describing levels of this type of experience. Probably at a lower level. Um, I wasn't a Buddha. Um, but I could have been some type of, I could have been enlightened in some way, which means that my mind would be stuck in that position. So I was really broken, as a result of not being able to follow through with this. My mind wasn't functioning because all of my coping skills were designed toward swallowing myself, being the observer of myself, paying attention to myself. I had this complete isolated orientation toward mindfulness and Buddhist meditation and all these things. That was the only way I could cope with life, and it was very disorienting. My sense of meaning was gone, but the purpose of my life was gone. So I had to find the truth, and that eventually led me to search for Catholicism, and I discovered that Catholicism is true, and it took me time to come out of these heresies and different things that I had. So if I was the serpent, then I would now this like serpent that wouldn't know, couldn't swallow itself, but couldn't quite find where to go, and kind of all tangled up and not content. But then I discovered something I read something from an Orthodox thinker, Elder Sophrony of Essex. He's considered an Orthodox saint at this point. And he said that, when we're doing the Easter meditation, we're getting in touch with our created light. We're the snake swallowing itself, essentially. God's not in that, when we're just doing that. I realized that I wasn't supposed to be swallowing myself. So what are we supposed to do? Well, I figured, it's gotta, we could say that then I realized, I'm supposed to be in touch with the love of God. And so one of the things I was doing in this time period or in these times was talking to God. That's the opposite of this merely listening to myself in meditation. So merely paying attention to myself was different than being heard by God. And so that's really what I think cured me throughout this process, was being heard by God, talking to God about my distress was the main thing that really helped me. And so that was really what got me through this. And you could say that but then I also had this desire not to be in touch with any of these weird ideologies, which obviously I didn't want to be hurt again. I thought these were bad. But the thing is also that, in order to talk to God, you do have to be aware of yourself. But I said, okay, I don't want to pay attention to any of my senses. And there were some errors because I'd be like, I can't enjoy taking walks anymore because that involves paying attention to the grass and the sky, and that's Buddhist. That's bad. So you could see that there was something wrong with my understanding. Although I was no longer fixated, like the snake eating its tail, I really no longer could use as a foundation any of these normal operations of the human mind, which I had made into a kind of idol in the past. So I couldn't understand how to make my mind function properly. So I began to become a kind of traditionalist Catholic. And so I really didn't want anything to do with anything that looked modern, anything that looked like kind of bringing everyone together, kind of these new age movements that I was always involved with. So I became a very, much more, what we could call rigid, traditional, kind of isolationist type mentality, because I wanted to escape from all those other things. So we almost could say that, I had taken the snake and I had maybe made maybe it went up a pole, so to get away from the world, So, it's kind of this vertical thing. Okay, we want to be for God, we don't want to have anything, we don't want to have any of this loosey-goosey, bring everything together, open to other ideologies and religions, none of that at all. But the thing is, it's almost like we could say, even in this thing, I never really fully embodied tradition, because traditionalism, for me, was like the vertical beam of the cross without the horizontal beam. Real traditionalism has both. Like, real traditionalism is, okay, there is that vertical and the horizontal. There's this way in which, the senses are honored. You could see in the traditional liturgies, the Latin Mass is full of ways in which, the smells of the incense, the sound of the choir, the beauty of the vestments. There's many ways in which the horizontal, the created, is very much integrated into this thing. And so we could see the snake should be on there, just like Moses, holding up the snake in the wilderness. There should be this, there's both of those things in traditional Catholicism. Mine was much more the pole that I'm trying to escape from. My little snake is going up there trying to get away. So that's there. But in a sense, I feel like what I'm talking about in these videos is this deeply Marian sense of what the church is doing post-Vatican II. And in a way, it's like we could see, the essentially what this could be is that kind of, this crucifix that we see with on the crozier of Pope St. John Paul II, which is kind of bent. It's kind of like, we could see the snake kind of, I don't know, reaching down toward the world. There's not a great metaphor for this. But what I'm talking about in these videos is the way in which Vatican II and traditionalism both came into focus for me when I had this experience, which kind of brought about this Marian understanding of the redemption of culture. It was really understanding that, okay, my traditionalist friends, they liked to, have square dancing, smoke a pipe, listen to the beautiful liturgy. There was a deeply integrative way in which they were being, whereas I'm going to traditionalism because I'm trying not to even enjoy taking a walk. I'm trying to keep my senses out of the picture because they were such an idol for me in the past, which is understandable, but an error. So I went from being this pantheist to almost being a Gnostic, using traditionalism as a veil for this kind of Gnostic denial of my nature. What I'm saying? So eventually what we really kind of see is that now it's more about like that bent crucifix. It's more about that even in post-Vatican II, we're reaching further down toward the world to elevate it. And I realized that ultimately always what I need to do is to redeem and reintegrate all that is natural. And this is the message that we talked about. There's some videos where I mentioned Tolkien. It's like this is the message of J.R.R. Tolkien. You can see how much his characters, they're able to enjoy. Gandalf is a good character. He's able to enjoy having fun and has the virtue we could call of eutrapelia, that to play, to be able to have fun with the hobbits and enjoy having a pipe and all these different things. It's a virtue because people like Saruman, who is not a good character, they stay up in this tall tower and they don't have any fun. They don't have any of that ability to kind of integrate the natural, and that's what makes them fall evil. That's or part of it. And so we can see that in a way this is the real path. We need to integrate what is natural. We can't deny what is human in ourselves. And this also is very similar to the understanding of Elder Sophrony of Essex, and it deepens and expands that understanding, which shifted that really brought about my conversion at the beginning, because that conversion that I had was really this thing where it reoriented my entire understanding of the whole marketplace of ideas. It made me realize, when I realized there was created light and uncreated light, it really made me realize the spectrum of world religions and how how Catholicism and Christianity were the true religion, because they were really how do we understand, how do we understand that the divine nature we're gonna participate in it. It's separate from us, but it's gonna indwell in us. And that was the most amazing thing that made that the highest ideology, or does make it the highest ideology. And I understood that all the other religions, I was beginning to have this concept dawning in my mind, that they were like in this spectrum around it, like they were kind of this shape, and they were arranged such that they were different approaches to how do we deal with different concepts of the divine nature and the human nature. Most of them, the Eastern ones, those are the same thing, and it's these errors in how they're kind of perceiving the self as divine and the created light as the light of the divine, just kind of descending into the self. And so I started seeing these as a spectrum. That was my big first conversion shift, of reoriented my understanding of how all the different concepts in the marketplace of ideas were oriented, so that it kind of made these spectrums, and there was eventually it developed into a spectrum of religions based on, all the different faculties of the mind and how they might prioritize, this thing. And then there was like the spectrum of the Christian denominations, and then the Catholicism in the center, and all these things. But the thing is, eventually what happened in this big shift for me was this understanding that we want to bring all those things into Catholicism. We want all this stuff to become redeemed into it. That was the second part of the shift. The first shift from my conversion was, okay, that's what the model looks like. That's what this looks like. The next shift was okay, the created light is good. It's not I have to choose the uncreated light instead of the created light. It's no, we want to use all these created lights but we want to illuminate them and make them into things that allow the uncreated light to shine through them and bring all the different ideologies into the world to make them this beautiful prism that contains, or this beautiful diamond, this ring that's going to hold the diamond. We're going to make it into this beautiful thing. And so that's like a step further. And so it makes this whole movement that I'm describing, these videos, this purpose that I'm trying to share here, this Marian purpose in history, or this process of the incarnation, or this progress into becoming like the Immaculate Conception. I'm trying to make this clear that this is an effort to really refine and use these good created supplements to the spiritual life, to take them from these other ideologies and religions and to rework and reintegrate the world's ideologies to bring about the Marian age, to take the errors of Russia and correct them, to bring about the triumph of the Immaculate Heart. And so that's what to have this victory by crushing the head of the ancient serpent, by integrating the body of the serpent. And that's what I'm talking about in these videos, this creation of supplements, not supplanting. Like what I did at the beginning was to supplant the relationship with God with relationship with myself. Now it's to supplement relationship with God with all these other created ideologies, redeemed and reworked in light of Catholic principles.